Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Anna Carugati. I'm the Group Editorial Director of WorldScreen. I'm delighted to be here with an extraordinary panel of the best of the creators in the children's business, children and youth business, right? So we're here to talk about the creative process. And I think you know everybody on stage. The names are there, but we have Angela, we have Ben, we have Jonathan, and we have Tom. So to jump right in, the first question, so my dad was an artist, so I grew up, he was a painter. I grew up around creativity, but a canvas is a whole different story from a TV show. So and my dad sort of fell into it. It wasn't something that he thought of being when he was a kid. So my first question to all of you is, how did you get into this business, and what was the appeal? Angela, start with you.
Oh, all right. I came in through the back door, I think a lot of people would say about me. I have a master's in child developmental psychology and instructional technology and media, all to say that I studied for this job and really wanted to take what was really wonderful about kids' education and curriculum, because I wasn't a fan of much of what was on TV, which I don't think any of you made at the time, as I was growing up, and then wanted to put that education and that point of view with vision and storytelling and obviously really great engaging images and put that on TV. So that was really my foray into getting into programming, and my first job was at Nickelodeon.
Fabulous. Ben.
Well, I came from just run-of-the-mill animators background. I went to animation school, studied there, started in a business as an animator, then designer, then grew up to be a storyboard artist, then a writer and a director. And I learned everything just as I went along. The whole top part of the process, if I can speak that way, like the show running, the writing and stuff. I just had to wing it. I didn't learn that. I just faked it, sorry.
Jonathan.
Well, I don't think I got into the business. I actually was running away from something. So I was a lawyer and not very happy. I was a property lawyer. It was quite boring. And then our daughter was born some 30 years ago, and I started to realize there's not much for her to watch. And I always had a bit of a passion for telling stories or film. And so I eventually got a job as a legal advisor on a primetime show on the basis they would train me as a producer. So I kind of was a showrunner, but I was running away from something rather than towards it initially.
Tom.
And I started out, my education was, I got an MBA, Master's in Business, and I ended up a couple of steps later at a wonderful, wonderful company called Nelvana, which many of you know. I see my Nelvana mentor there, Vince. And that's where I met my creative partner, Jennifer Perch. And we were exposed to probably 30 or 40 productions in kids. And from seeing all that from our special vantage point, she and I knew that, this is what we want to do. And we knew the kind of show we wanted to make, a very specific one. So it led to our launching our own company after Nelvana, Fresh TV.
Wow, okay. So the other question that comes to mind as we watch television, and by the way, the research that I do before these panels is I look into the panelist's background, and in your case, it was your work. And I have to say, with everything that's happening in the world today, it was such a pleasure to watch your wonderfully funny, creative, innocent shows. I think I'm going to be doing this now on a regular basis. On a really bad day, I'm going to tune into some kids programming because it makes you feel so good. Taking any show as an example, tell us, where does the creative spark come from? In the shower in the morning, during a conversation, driving to work. Angela, any show, because you've done many, and why don't you list some of the shows that you've done? And
Sure. Blue's Clues was my first foray, and that was answering the question of a game show. What would a preschool game show look like? And so I think a lot of the times I approach things as, why this show, why now? And for Blue's Clues, it was, okay, let's think about for preschoolers, can they be the contestants, and can they be the contestants from home? And that kind of started my whole idea or thought of pseudo-interactivity back in the, I'm going to age myself if I say when, but it's been about 20 years. And then for Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is another one of the shows where that was more about bringing Fred's legacy, Fred Rogers' legacy, to the forefront and put a lot of love in that for socio-emotional skills. And then Super Y is a third, where we really wanted to marry reading and celebrating reading with superheroes and just knowing that power that you have when you learn to read. So my shows really come from bringing together this really strong, important message that I'd love to say to the world with all of the research point of view and great stories.
Ben.
Yes, I guess for me the creative spark comes mostly from like everyday experiences. Like I've got a weirdly dysfunctional but very happy family. This is where I'm from, and they're all like peculiar people, characters in their own sense. So I've got like a whole bunch of weird stuff that happened to me as a kid and still keeps happening to me as an adult, and I keep like dipping into this and basically making money off their pains and misery, you know. That's kind of what I do.
Jonathan?
It's a tough question because it's not an easy process. A lot of people think that the ideas for things come from looking at the market and looking at where there might be gaps in the market and so on. Ultimately, like Ben, I think the stories come from within. If there's a certain passion for the story or a certain emotional connectivity to the story. You know, in the case of H2O, I already had done many years earlier Ocean Girl, and so I had a passion for underwater and so on. I work very closely with Nicole Keeb at ZDF. Often she's whispering in my ear about something that might spark a memory, but generally it comes from within. You've got to be connected to it. These are your babies for a couple of years, so you want to have passion, you want to be connected, or you're going to have a very unhappy few years.
Right. Tom?
Definitely the shower.
The shower, okay.
So I'm kind of like you, Jonathan. We do a lot of talking with broadcasters. So Total Drama, for instance, came as a request from our Canadian broadcaster, Teletoon. They said, we need an animated reality show. And then we stepped away, and when I say we, I really mean to say Jennifer and I. Wish she was here with me because she's my co-creator, writer, muse. We don't shower together, but she's a terrific creative partner, and we have two others. So we collaborate a lot. Sure, there's that spark. You want to know what the spark is? They're always weird and different and surprising, but she and I will bat things back and forth and either kill them or suddenly they come to life right in front of us. I don't know if that answers your question,
Yeah,
but definitely the broadcaster aspect is crucial.
So, again, from revisiting children's television, because my kids are big now, humor seems to be one of the constant themes. How important is humor in programming for children, whether it's educational to just giving them some comic relief after a tough day? Angela?
Oh, it's so important. I think that it's a bonding tool, right? Whenever we can all laugh together, I think it's really something that can bring more and more viewers in, and really know that we've created characters and stories and put them in situations where we can expect the funny. And for little ones, it's more about surprises and silly. And then as they get older, right, it's more about that joined embarrassment or a situation that they're in that kind of makes everybody laugh together, which is my favorite kind of humor, is when we're obviously all laughing as one as opposed to laughing at, which I think in our world is another thing to think about, just because we're always trying to embrace in our culture right now, to embrace each other as much as possible.
Right. And do you find, Ben, you're an adult, and this is for the rest of you too, and you're trying to think of so this is a question, are you trying to think of what will make a child laugh? Or do you want to make you and your other writers and colleagues laugh, and if it works for you, then you figure it will work for the audience as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, at the time when I was making the first episodes of Gumball, that was a big question, like how do you make kids laugh and stuff? Clearly, there's a relationship to slapstick and kids laughing that works immediately. But then also what we wanted was for someone like older to be able to watch it with them. So we wanted that show to be something that, like, you know, a little brother and a big brother could bond over, or, you know, someone could watch with their dad or their mom and have a laugh. Like the same way the same way I was watching The Simpsons with my parents, basically. This is what we wanted. So we try and put like a little bit of something funny for everyone in there. And it's like, and I think the humor part is obviously the most important thing because it's like comfort food for the soul or something, you know?
Right.
I think in live action, it's, and particularly for a tween audience, it's slightly different. So I've always found it better if the characters are facing even dark adversity with a little bit of sass, a little bit of comedy, but not necessarily. It's different to animation. It's not so much slapstick. It's more about wry humor or clever, empowering humor. Particularly as a counterpoint to what they might be dealing with. So I think humor is always important, but I think if you've got to do it as an empowering device rather than this, slapstick, I think that actually works against us in live action.
Tom, some of your characters are like off the wall. Where does the humor come from?
Well, first of all, as a rule of thumb, fart jokes always work. So we always like to smatter a few of those in the show. I think our characters are really, I think that's what we're most proud of in our show is what Jennifer does is she reaches into pop culture for her references. So for instance, the character of Owen in Total Drama is, he's Chris Farley, but he's Chris Farley reinterpreted for a young audience. A lot of what you guys were saying is that you'd like a joke that a young child and an older child, even a parent, can enjoy together. We don't tend to do that. We tend to think very, very specifically about demographics. So a lot of the times, if it's a tween show, we'll actually be very pleased. You'll often hear people say, oh, I love when people throw in jokes for parents, and the kids are like, what's that? That's not what we do. We like jokes that the parents will say, what was that? And they're like, no, never mind, mom and dad, you don't get it. Well, that's when we feel we've succeeded. So we think demographically, and we think of never speaking down to them. I think probably, Jonathan, you'd agree with that.
Yeah, it's empowerment. It's really about owning their own space. The worst thing that we could possibly do is put a parent in or an adult into a, protagonist or a lead, don't.
And Angela, I've heard that children tend to learn best when they're entertained or when they feel drawn in and they're laughing too. Have you found that to be the case?
Oh yeah, they need to feel comfortable. They need to feel comfortable in that space, and the way in which for the younger ones that we do that is to set up that familiarity. Did I say that right? In terms of music, in terms of comedy, in terms of open and close, and to say a little bit about what we were talking about here, I actually don't care if the writers in the room are cracking up at the jokes that we have in the script. We have a research department, and we can be really funny with 4-year-olds. That same joke that everybody was kind of scratching their head about, when we bring it into research and we read it to the kids and they're cracking up with those big belly laughs. That's, again, what's so important to us, and that same level of empowerment or bonding that we instinctively want to be giving to kids that we might not necessarily realize the level that we want to do. But I think all of those pieces, I call it, it's almost like a 7-layer cake, where it looks delicious and it almost looks so easy to make, but all of those details that you need to put in there to craft and serve up the very best show. Because we need kids to want to watch the show themselves, or else they're not going to get anything out of it anyway.
Right. And speaking of needing them to watch, they have so many screens available to them today, and the little ones really are digital natives. And they like seeing, so if they connect with a show, they like seeing that show in different ways on different screens. When you're creating a show, do you think about the other applications during the creative process, or does that come afterwards? Anyone can go first. Angela, go ahead.
We always think about it as a brand, so there's always that sense of, oh my gosh, if this could be a theme park, if this could be at Radio City Music Hall and a live experience. This concept itself and these characters have to be characters that kids want to hang out with and be part of. And then it changes, how we do that changes depending on what it is that they're watching. So I come from an interactive point of view. I want the kids to always feel like they're part of that process. And so even when they're reading a book that we might have created out of, based and inspired on the episode, it's still a book. And so it has to work for publishing in a way that's a little different. So for the smaller screen, for the bigger screen, I think we're constantly thinking about how do you just make sure that the intent and the soul of the project is there and works, but then how do we maximize what it is that the kids are watching on. The most important thing is that we are everywhere kids are.
Right. Ben, there are a lot of games that are connected to Gumball, right? How does that all come about?
Well, I think quite often it comes from like specific sequences that we do, you know. So we'll do, for example, like a joke bit that is entirely like a video game or something, and I think this inspires the marketing team to exploit this into like, you know, video games for the online part of the show. Otherwise, I mean, there's many ways to decline all kind of properties. I think if you immediately have something that works, likable characters and stories, and an identity, I think it's quite easy then to take this to other places.
Jonathan?
I don't generally think of, you know, multi-screen use when I'm thinking up stories. It's really content-driven. It's really about the passion, the story, and the content story. However, as a filmmaker, you know, you've got to be aware of the fact that kids are watching on tablets, they're watching on smartphones, they're rarely watching on televisions, I think. And so, just the photography, the framing for live action has changed dramatically. It's got to work. The design of the stories have to work, because sometimes kids are watching in smaller bites because they have the power. They are controlling when and how and for how long, or how long that bus ride is to school or whatever. Social media is important for young teens. You know, social media is really important. They're very engaged. Doing EPK and doing behind the scenes and involving kids in the making of the show has become almost a job function within the 200 crew that we have. It's become a discrete area of its own, you know, being engaged so that the kids can watch, can follow on social media, they can go into websites, they can download, you know, pictures or behind the scenes pictures, or engage in the craft skills, because we're talking to 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds, and they're really interested in how stories are told and that's deconstructing the media. I think that's really healthy that they do that.
They're backstorians.
Yeah, I wish they were in the plotting room some of the time.
Right?
Yeah.
Tom?
Jennifer and I don't tend to think in screens and platforms. We think story, like you, but I guess, I mean, that the platform will often dictate the format length. So are we doing 11s? Are we doing a 22? But even now, like, we're doing the rule of thumb just keeps getting thrown out the door. So we thought, we're only going to be writing 11s from now, 11-minute episodes, and now we're developing late-stage development on a 22-minute aimed at 5 to 7-year-olds, which is a very long format, but it totally works. So really, we tend to rely on our commissioning broadcaster. We're just old school, to tell us, look, this is what we want, this is how long it's going to be, go and tell your story that suits that. So we do really rely heavily on our broadcast partner. That being said, we just relaunched one of our kids shows, and I'll plug it later, did a PSA, because that demographic has now aged up. And they're adults, and we didn't have a broadcast partner. In that case, we pushed it out through social, and that was all about cutting it into various chunks, creating a piece that other people would then cut into their own chunks and broadcast and forward on. And there are aspects of total drama that are very forgiving to that. We have little confessional chunks where the character literally turns to camera and confesses their innermost thoughts. Those are just easily excisable and thrown out in other media, which I think you'll see in my trailer.
Okay, so we've talked for a while. Let's start looking at the work that these creators have made. Angela, we're going to talk about Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, but first, let's take a look at some of the work you've done. Could we see Angela's video clip, please?
Ding, ding. Hi, neighbor. I'm playing with my trolley. Ding, ding. Let's go play.
Right from the beginning, we knew we could not find another Fred Rogers. And so the only way to do it really well would be to animate the neighborhood of make-believe. Daniel Tiger is all about a pro-social curriculum, and the way we like to talk about it is that they're life skills.
This is cool. Grrr!
And we put them in these little musical strategies that are easy to sing and easy to understand.
When something seems bad, turn it around and find something good.
I really would love to be able to do for millions of kids with this show what Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did for me.
Excellent. So, in creating Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, how much, you said you wanted to, honor Fred Rogers. How much did you take from the original show, and how much did you then adapt and change for today's young ones?
Yeah, that's such a good question. But first, can I do a little shout out to the 9-Story Media Group, because Vince also, as a mentor of mine, is here. And I'm so proud because today we just announced our Creative Affairs Department out of New York and Toronto, Dublin, Manchester. Anyway, very excited about this new venture. But doing what we do for Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood about rebranding, because we're bringing Blue's Clues back as well. So whenever we're trying to take projects that are so close to our heart and think about, okay, now, why now, and why this show? I think for Daniel, it was these little nods of love that if you were a super fan of Mr. Rogers, you will see within the show. Like, for instance, Daniel Tiger wears a little red sweater and sneakers, and if you look closely, you see there are other sweaters in the, I'm going to bore you with all this detail, but little sweaters in the closet and fish tank in the world. But all of the characters from the neighborhood of make-believe of the original show have all grown up, and they all have preschoolers of their own. And so we've incorporated through animation the Main Street area of what Fred had, so that we can go and we can use adults and talk to adults about problems that Daniel would have. But then we also have the characters that the kids, it's a preschooler's fantasy world. There's a castle and a museum go around, and how could this not be a show that we would all love? So, as a crazy Fred Rogers fan, which I think I've said probably way too many times, I just got to play within that world as a 4-year-old, and so I think that it was very carefully constructed to just make sure that we keep as much as we can. The first 7 seconds of the show with the song are almost exactly the way Fred had done them, and then we go off on our own.
Right.
Can I just plug the documentary? Has everyone seen this beautiful,
Yes,
Won't You Be My
please.
Neighbor?
Yeah.
Go and see it.
Thank you. Yes, it's very true.
Ben, so the amazing world of Gumball has a mix of styles to them. Before we start talking about that, can we see Ben's clip, please?
And now over to Barry for the sports news. Sports!
So Ben, you incorporate 2D, 3D, and live action. how did that idea come about, and how complicated is it to do that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out it was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. It's a really hard pipeline to maintain on the long run. But obviously, like the reason it looks like this is because back in the days I was working in commercials, very unsuccessfully. I was working for this company called Studio AK in London, and was just wasting their money on not winning any pitch. But it got me to experiment a lot with all kind of techniques and styles and stuff. And then I rage quitted commercials because I was utterly unsuccessful. And when Cartoon Network hired me and asked me to present the show, what I did is I pulled those characters out of my drawers and I sold it to them again. And so that's how it came about, that look. And to unify all this bunch of styles, I put it on like photographs just. And this concept of these characters having a second chance at life and, you know, and living in a world that we inhabit, I thought that was quite exciting. But like I said, it's a hard, complex pipeline to put together, especially back in the days. I think we were at the best we could have done technically, but with time now, we realized that our pipeline like became antiquated. But once the machine is going, you can't just turn it around.
Right, and the kids are still loving it, right? So.
Yeah, well, I think it's what helped us stand out a little bit as well.
Right. Jonathan, so shooting underwater is not for everybody. I can only imagine it's a little bit complicated. Let's see your clip and then we'll talk about that. Could we see Jonathan's clip, please?
There's something going on here, isn't there? Something magical.
That's ridiculous. There is no such thing as magic.
I've got a special power that I'm not afraid to use. Come on, this is my adventure. This is my fantasy. It's all about living in the ocean, being wild and free. 'Cause I'm no ordinary girl. I'm from the deep blue underworld. By the sea, the world's my oyster. I'm no ordinary girl.
What would you say if Imogen and I found a human who can do magic?
Humans can't do magic.
Well, I'm pretty sure she's human.
Who are you?
You shouldn't be able to see me.
You better tell me what you're doing in my room before I have you arrested.
Okay, Jonathan, when we had our email exchange and our conversation, it's fearless stories for correct me, fearless stories for fearless girls. The fearless is also your part, right?
Yeah, the
You have to be
fearless is
fearless in doing this.
A lot of it is my fear, yes. And I must be some sort of masochist because I keep pushing the envelope, and that's what often drives me. We're using CG and wire work, blue screen, green screen, and so on. Shooting underwater is extremely difficult. At times, it's extremely dangerous. We have, 22 people and stuntmen, stuntwomen from the stunt guys come from James Bond to help us. So we have real sharks and, electrical prods from the Navy and so on. So yes, sometimes I think this is nuts, but it takes us into an imagination, into a frontier that is a wonderful canvas. And moving into whether it's in the jungle or whether it's into a magical world or however we can realize that fantasy story. So overcoming my fear is part of the fun of it, I think, as well as the fact that the stories themselves are often driven by empowering particularly young women due to the fact that I started for my daughter many years ago. I seem to have locked into that. Also, I think young women today face as much, if not more, of a need for empowering stories in a world so set on disempowering them constantly that there's a never-ending, search for stronger and stronger young female role models.
Absolutely. I heard the other day that we often talk about our daughters as being beautiful and our sons as being smart. I mean, come on. Anyway, moving on. Not that our sons aren't smart, but why do we make those distinct? I mean, it starts right there. All right. So, Tom, we're going to look at your clip, but do you want to give the cue as to when you want to pause it? Because
there's a little portion of black.
Okay. So let's roll Tom's clip until the portion of black.
We're just children!
Oh, yeah. Sorry! Stand back!
Let a ninja handle this!
Spit him out! Spit him out right now!
Let's do it!
This is the best day ever! Woohoo! Did you see that?
Okay, let's stop it right there for a moment. My question is, how do you engage this age group? They're a little elusive. I mean, anyone who's had a teenage son or daughter, it's not easy to engage with them.
Yeah, I mean, this is a relaunch of our biggest show ever, Total Drama Island and Total Drama franchise. So this is a show that was extremely popular for Cartoon Network US, worldwide, and for Chorus Entertainment in Canada. And but we had to ask ourselves that question because that was a show aimed at tweens, 8 to 12-year-olds, and what the request actually came from Cartoon Network because it was such a brand-affiliated show. Kids just assumed that this was a Cartoon Network original, which it actually wasn't, but that was exciting for all of us. So they came back many, many years after the show had already run its natural course and said, let's try something new. So what Jennifer and I at first tried to do was age the characters down just a little, because in our original show they were all 16-year-olds. And so we thought we'll make them 12, and that maybe that'll appeal to a 6 to 9 as opposed to tween audience, and it didn't work at all, and we were really struggling. And then all of a sudden, one of us, I think it was me, it might have been Jen, said, let's age them from 16 down to 4, and let's put them in a daycare, and let's have them just behave just incredibly badly and run their poor daycare worker off his feet. And it's a bit of a risk because we were betting on the fact that kids wouldn't be turned off when you're 7, 8, 9. Do you really want to see preschool again? Or maybe you don't think it's for you. But we kind of banked on the fact that they would look back on that period and say, well, when I was a kid, those things mattered, or I can laugh at that now. And they can. I think the numbers are bearing it out. But we had to go to to answer your first question, a much sillier, ridiculous place. In fact, our first cut of the show went to Cartoon, and they were like, you could be a little sillier. And we were like, oh. And we did. We just amped it up, and the writing room is ridiculous. And we had to go to a sillier, crazy place than we've ever been before at that younger age group. Just giving ourselves permission, I think, is one of the things, yeah.
Now, the last part of your clip is you went in a different direction, right? So tell us what we're going to be seeing.
Yeah, it's a strange time for us because while Total Drama is being reinvented for a younger audience, and we're really pleased with the results, we have another show that was our very first show, which did really well, called 16. I don't know, has anybody ever heard of 16? Yeah? A few. Yeah. 16 was an animated version of Friends. So it was 16-year-olds sitting around, often sitting around in a sitcom format talking about life. What we've done is when we were thinking about, is anybody here familiar with the Will and Grace short that they put out just before the US election of 2016? Some? So we took a page out of that book and we created, with our own money, created an 8-minute scene from that original show. But instead of it being a show about teenagers aimed at 8 to 12s, it's a show about where they just turn 18 and it's for 18 to 25-year-olds, because that young audience has now aged up. And so what they do is they swear and they talk quite frankly about sexuality and all kinds of stuff, but they mainly talk about the upcoming midterm elections, and they argue about whether or not they should bother to register to vote. And so that we didn't put out through a broadcaster, we put it out through social, and within a week we hit 8 million views, which we're really, really proud of, which means 8 million first-time voters were at least given the chance to think about registering to vote.
Let's take a look.
It's a very short clip, guys. Okay, that's the clip. Sorry, I just didn't want to. Told you could chop it into small bits, but basically, it's 8 minutes of 8 minutes. Sorry, it's very short. That's it. Just 8 minutes. I didn't like the cut that we had, so I said I'll just use this. But it's wall-to-wall laughs, and it's research-based. So we read that there are 4 very specific reasons why 18 to 25-year-olds don't vote, and we assigned 1 reason to each of our hilarious characters, and hopefully we convince some people to hit the polls.
There is so much more we could talk about, but our time is coming to an end, and I'm going to invite Laurine Garot to join us on stage. These 4 individuals, as I'm sure you've seen from our discussion, have contributed so much to the television industry that we want to recognize their efforts and their contributions. So,
it's a great honor to award you the Trendsetter Award in partnership with WorldScreen for the leading creative minds in kids today. So we begin with Angela Santomero. Angela. Ben Bocquelet. And now Jonathan Shiff.
To Tom, and we should recognize that he cut his honeymoon short to be with us this morning, so thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. And please, again, let's honor these fabulous creators.